good evening of mixed emotions. I'm gonna keep this one pretty short because my hair is wet, I gotta get to bed, and I keep repeating the cycle of staying up too late. But there was a really interesting shower thought I just had after watching Jeff Keighley's hype trailer for the Game Awards, which was super cool because they used a Radiohead song, which was like not like a super popular one either. I thought it was really inspired, and even I, who often have to make videos like this because of the dominance of cinematic 3D games in the gaming space, even I have to admit that all those cinematic games looked pretty cool with that song playing over them. I got chills. It was pretty cool. But there was a moment, right, where he was trying his best to sync things up, and Big Fish Eat the Little Ones, that played over Dave the Diver. The hot topic of this cycle of Game Awards, right? And I was like, LMAO fish, and then I tweeted it. And while I was tweeting it, I was like, holy crap, because that poor guy literally nailed the nail in the coffin, nail on the head or whatever, about the exact controversy he created about Dave the Diver. And this is just like, this could have stayed in my head, but it would have been like running around like a hamster on a wheel. So I was like, I'm just going to get this out here if anybody wants to get kind of caught up on the drama and my opinion, and just, weigh in, because this is something I am ridiculously invested in. Basically, if you don't know what's going on, Dave the Diver kind of snuck in as just, what looked like another solid indie game, and I have really no resentment towards the game at all. I have famously resented the other game in this discussion, Ori, for the fact that it is in a similar financial boat to Dave the Diver, and now, to be honest, I feel much less resentment towards either of them because more people are talking about this issue, and I can see more clearly why Ori frustrated me. But to backtrack, Dave the Diver is a super ambitious indie game with like a million different features: life sim, Metroidvania, exploration, cooking, all that stuff. And it was put in as like the big, the big Chad, I suppose, in the indie games category this year for Game Awards, and I'm not even invested in any of the other games winning for that, but it's a huge thing started because, and I didn't know this company received a lot of funding to make the game. So similar to Ori, I believe Moon Studio received all their money from Microsoft, if I'm not mistaken, and that's why the game is able to have such a beautiful, like, artistic, everything. It's why that game looks so darn good, and why I always felt uncomfortable comparing it to Hollow Knight and stuff, because those were the two big dogs, but the development, these were, I don't know if we've already had this discussion historically about Ori, but I feel like Ori was one of the faces of indie games, despite not really having the same financial DNA or something like that, the same economic background as the other indie games, and especially comparing Hollow Knight and Ori head on head, there's a big issue there. And I'm not the person for this discussion, to be honest, on the financial side, because it's a complicated one, right? Because Team Cherry has a lot of money. They have a lot of money, but they got it from Kickstarter, and then they got it from sales of their Kickstarter games. So is Kickstarter the deciding factor for if you're indie? Then Yacht Club Games has become a pretty well-established company off their Shovel Knight money, and they got a ton of money for Shovel Knight off like their Kickstarter campaign, like the general term. Maybe it wasn't actually on Kickstarter. And is Yacht Club still indie? They seem very professional these days. I don't know if it's like, are you getting support and money from the big dogs, Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, or are you not? I truly, that's not a place that I put my brain a lot, and you've probably seen other videos about that. So I want to get to bed after saying my piece, which is that indie is not a genre, and Jeff Keighley accidentally said the worst thing when he was asked about this. So everyone was like, why is Dave the Diver in there for indie? They got a ton of money. They're not really fighting the same battle as these smaller studios, or less backed small studios. Because I imagine, and I have not done my research, but it seems unnecessary unless I'm going to be making shots at the poor game, which I'm not. It seems like this is a small studio making a very indie core game, a very indie-ish game, basically a side scroller with innovation and Metroidvania. And they got money from some giant investor. I don't think it's clear cut who it is, because I don't think it's like a console exclusive, but they're not really playing the same game as everyone else. I'm repeating myself at this point. And Jeff Keighley said, oh, well, what defines indie is the heart of indie. And that is the worst answer. That is the worst answer. I don't believe he went on to define this, but we all know what he means. And you, that's genre, right? It's either, there's two sides here. So of course, indie is either, you're either looking at it as like, it's a genre. It's maybe like a retro inspired 2D thing, or maybe it's about the studio. Oh, forget about it. It's not about the studio. Then it's about the genre. Beep, boop. Like, both of these things are complicated, right? It definitely leans more towards the studio, but it does not fall on the genre. Metroid Dread. Can you imagine if Metroid Dread was up in the running for Indie Game of the Year because it's a 2D side-scroller? Like, just sit with me on that. The money that goes into these games, the money that went into Ori and Dave the Diver, I don't know exactly how much, but it puts it more comparable to whatever crazy butt funding Nintendo is giving Mercury Steam. And of course, I think that Metroid Dread's not an indie game for obvious Nintendo reasons, but Mario Wonder. Mario Wonder has the heart of an indie. Oh my gosh, it's so inventive, right? Let's start defining this heart of indie. Oh, it's so inventive. That's definitely part of indie, right? Indie games do things you've never seen before. They take familiar genres and they turn them on their heads. You know, definitely you got that with Mario Wonder, to some degree at least. You know, the spirit is there, even if its skeleton isn't that different from a 2D platformer. How about Mario Wonder had a non-traditional development cycle? How about it wasn't being used to, you know, just pay the shareholders for Nintendo. You know, they could have had 2 Mario games in the time that it took to make Mario Wonder, but they decided to take 8 years or 9 years or whatever they did to make it. That is the spirit of indie right there. That is just, oh, you can feel it. It's crackling with independent power. It's just so out there. It's a rebel. Like, you could really tease at this and be like, oh, but you know, it's the heart of indie because it's a side scroller and it's so lushly animated. That is the heart of indie, right? It's these things that indie games often are, because indie studios are often working with genres that are easier to develop than big budget studios, right? You don't see a lot of Elder Scrolls type indie games. The Elder Scrolls format seems pretty hard to make independently, but you see a lot of platformers and a lot of Metroidvanias and a lot of story-based games about depression. And because of that, you know, we've gotten this kind of mixed sense of, is indie a genre? Is it one of those genres I just rattled off that all the indie games seem to be most days? Not always, but quite frequently. Or is it about the backing of the company? It's obviously about the company. It's just a complicated method of naming that, right? And like, you know, indie rock has gone through this. Like, indie rock is defined by the sound. Like, indie has lost its meaning. Like, indie is about the backing. Like, the indie rock bands that I've listened to are pretty big names, you know what I mean? Like, you get to a point where it is irrelevant, but I don't think that gaming is heading that same direction because, like, I don't know. I mean, to be fair, I'm rusty on the music industry now, but there's just a gulf. There's just a gulf between Dave the Diver and Pizza Tower needs to be canceled. I wish I had more energy in me to explain why, but if you Google, like, Pizza Tower dev, Nazi stuff, I'm sorry if this is news, like, if you Google, like, Pizza Tower dev, Nazi stuff, there's just, like, so many screenshots. I saw this murderous post on Tumblr that hasn't got out, and, like, maybe it's not real, but it looked pretty bad. Anyhow, it's not like I was rooting for one game or another, but Dave the Diver and Ori, they shouldn't be in the same pond eating up the small fish that don't have the same budgets. And this really isn't about the Game Awards, right? That's why I'm making this video. I don't really care who wins the Game Awards generally, because I'm a Nintendo and heart of indie type gamer. I'm not, you know, a Last of Us Lands Part 3 man, you know what I mean? I don't know what I'm talking about. That was supposed to be 3 different game titles thrown together. Yeah, I don't play anything in 4K. It's just, this is the gaming landscape that wins there is not really my cup of tea, except for, like, the big Mario Zeldas. But, yeah, the real problem here is just, it's another, and I didn't even think I was gonna make this video because I'm tired and I didn't want it to be so negative, but it is really another step in this process of disrespecting 2D games, right? Because a lot of this is just walking circles around this idea that side-scrollers are a lesser genre. there's this idea that I guess is 30 plus years old now or so, right? Like maybe 25, I don't know. There's this idea from the SNES era that 3D is better. And in reality, I don't think it's just that. I think it's immersion is better, right? I feel like, if there's one reason people like 3-dimensional games over 2-dimensional games, it's probably because it brings you more into it. It feels more real. It feels more cinematic. That's wonderful. But it's really unfortunate how the big companies, bankrolling things like Ori in order to have them make their, quote, indie game, it's always a side priority, right? Like Animal Well was one thing. There's another Metroidvania whose name I forget that's coming out now, and it'll be all over everywhere soon once it comes out. I think Microsoft was making a console exclusive, and I doubt that it was made by their big people who make all their big Microsofty games. It was probably a smaller studio bankrolled to make something exclusive to capitalize on that small niche 2D side-scrolling audience, which is the heart of indie. It doesn't matter if the people who Meteos is like a totally different thing. It doesn't matter if the people who made this new psychedelic Microsoft game were actually independent or not. It looks like it was made by an independent studio, but that's not fair to the real independent studio people. I have been waiting for a chance to rip this person to shreds. I'm not doing editing, so I'm not going to put their name in here. This is a super high quality video, but there is a thumbnail that was going around. That was this person's video, like some gaming video essayist who had this eureka moment, and he said, I want shorter games with worse graphics, with longer dev times, and I'm not kidding, or whatever the Sonic meme is. You know the one. If you don't know it, it was this meme that's become pretty big, at least on like Twitter gaming spaces, that was kind of like, if the average game that wins awards and stuff is super high graphics, super long, like longness is definitely a value, and it has to be like crunched in a short amount of time to get it out. And in order to kind of address those issues with the industry where we're crunching artists to make incredibly high fidelity games with a lot of content in a small amount of time, Sonic came in to give voice, which is a totally great ethic, which is games should look worse, games should take longer to make, and games should have less content. And that is a super solid ethic. That is not a reason to play indie games. That is not a reason to play side scrollers. There is a thumbnail where somebody has like, I figured it out. I'm gonna play shorter games with worse graphics. And the thumbnail has, I kid you not, like Shovel Knight, Dead Cells, Hades, Hotline Miami, and some other titanic 2D game. And this makes my blood boil. Those games are beautiful. Like, at least if we're talking Dead Cells, like, that game is the best looking pixel art of the last, 5 years, in my opinion. That game has been in development forever. That game has so much content. That game looks beautiful. It is not short. It is not lacking content. It was not easy to make. It was probably hell for the multiple developers at Evil Empire and Motion Twin, and it is not ugly. Like, that is a straight up misunderstanding of the genre to call it worse looking. It is only worse looking if you do not value pixel art. And this isn't me trying to bite this guy's ankles like an angry bulldog, like, you activated my trap card. I'm just saying, you can't come from your values being, I want 500-hour cinema games, and then say, indie games are ugly, 2D games are ugly, pixel art's ugly. Like, be quiet and pick a battle, because whatever you're saying, you're probably not right. Like, Tears of the Kingdom is a worse looking game with less content that took longer to make than some of these games. I'm sorry, that's true. Like, that's just how Nintendo rolls. Go to Nintendo if you want to uphold that ethic and then deal with all their other ethical stuff. Indie games, they can look, oh my god. An indie game, yes, an indie game could look worse than Ori, that's totally possible, but if an indie studio is making something like Dead Cells, they are at the top of their game, and to discredit that is just madness. And the amount of content in Dead Cells is gigantic, considering what it is. Like, it is packed with content. So this, I think, is just one of those things where people with different values from different gamer spaces are colliding, and it's really ugly. It's just very unfortunate. So it's just one of those times where, you have to just stop and really parse things out. Not every Metroidvania is indie. Metroid Dread is not indie. Ori is debatably not indie. So to say that like you have to compare every independently made Metroidvania, to say that Earthblade has to look as good as Ori, and that if Earthblade doesn't, Earthworm, if Ori doesn't look as good as, if Earthblade doesn't look as good as Ori, it's a cheaper, lesser product, you're insane. You're completely insane. Because this was made by an actual independent studio, a small team working off their Celeste earnings. Oh my god, there's a depth of clownery when you mix these terms up and stuff. So I just kind of urge people to, take this Dave the Diver thing as a lesson. And like, if you let an infinite budget go into the indie pool, they're just gonna slaughter everybody. Like, big surprise, Ori is one of the biggest games. It has a lot going for it. I haven't played it yet, but it's got the biggest budget. You can't just let Metroid Dread go into the indie category and start beating Axiom Verge up. That's just nuts. Like, it's just unfair, because you have to consider indie versus big company is one thing, and genre as a separate thing. Indie is not a genre. If you consider indie as genre, things just get so embarrassing. And it's just gonna take a while for people to learn this, but hopefully my rambling was your favorite way to learn this. Hopefully you just love my thoughts, because I've delivered them, and I'll get this out to you quickly. And yeah, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. That's just what my channel's gonna be forever now. Yeah, it's just not the way to be talking about these games. A lot of really insulting things were said about a lot of developers indirectly, right? There have been some great takes, because everybody's on the same page as me. Everybody in my circles, at least. There are some great takes. Like, you basically just called the indie category the released for less than $40 category. It's completely what it is. There are so many games that look indie, but they're not indie. They're Metroidvania or whatever. They're short, they're 2D, things that would make you cost $30 if you're not made by Nintendo. And it's just so, it can be tokenistic, like with the psychedelic Microsoft game. It can be sometimes super authentic, where like, oh, Metroid is the 2D Metroidvania dude, like, we're gonna make a really good one. It's really complicated, right? But it's not always indie. It's not indie if it's not indie, right? So yeah, it's just one of those things, and hell if I'm not the person to blabber about that. So have a good night. I'm not editing this. I hope you enjoy Alucard or something for all the B-roll. Thank you.